Winging It is a show about web design, development, and Oddbird's approach to solving problems. On today's show, Ed will talk to Miriam and me, I'm Sandra, about his experience with htmx and about the types of projects it's best suited for. So, Ed, as a designer, can you help me understand what htmx even is?
Yeah, absolutely. So to me, I guess my definition for it is that it's a lightweight front-end framework that embraces hypermedia as the engine of the web. And that sounds a little bit jargony. So I think it might help to talk about the benefits or what it brings to the table, right? Because at the end, it's a tool that we're using to build web applications, and we expect it to provide some benefits to our users, right? And also some nice things for to us as developers. So one of the things I like about it is that it provides a faster or more performant user experience that doesn't require a full page load for every interaction. So you don't have to wait for the entire page to reload. You can actually go in and reload just small option, portions of your UI to make the changes or respond to interactions of your user. Um, then also a big draw, I think, for developers is that it allows you to avoid complex tooling and build processes. So we've all heard about JavaScript fatigue and just how even creating a simple blog or a simple um, site requires all this very complex tooling that very easily gets out of date, and it feels like maintaining just the tooling and the build chain is a work in itself, apart from actually building your application, right? And then the other thing that I really like is that it allows you to use any language and framework that you want. So you're not locked into just something that works with JavaScript or that even compiles it down to JavaScript. If you have a a server side language that you like, it could be Python, Ruby, PHP, Go, Rust, whatever you like. Um, and if it's able to output HTML with some custom attributes, then you're good to use HTMX, right? But in the end, I guess it's one of the many tools that we have at our disposal to take our ideas, our designs, our applications, and make them a reality for our users.
I've been excited about this one because you've talked about it a few times, but I've not had a chance to really look into it. Um, so I'm sort of curious there. Is it's a templating language then that you would use with some other backend, and then it um, gives you some JavaScript, or what is that step like?
Yeah. So the details, I guess, I would explain it as it's a runtime JavaScript framework, right? It doesn't precompile your stuff, so it takes in plain HTML elements, nodes, and your DOM, and by attaching specific attributes to it, lets you inject that special behavior, right? So in the end, it's a JavaScript library that you would include in your page at runtime. So you will ship it to your users. I think it's relatively lightweight, and then it's gonna go in and parse your DOM, and it's gonna add extra capabilities, right? With this philosophy that you are only using HTML attributes instead of writing like a different language or writing classes separately, you're only sprinkling this little attributes into your HTML, and that gives it like superpowers and allows you to do more interactivity instead of the regular, oh, I can only click on links or submit forms.
Right. So that probably means you're getting an initial page load of that uh, basic HTML, and then you're spicing it up from there.
Yeah,
I
and
yeah.
no, go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I was just gonna follow up and say I think you've brought some demos. Could you show us some stuff that you've built with it? What it can do?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me start up here. and share.
So far, I love this because you've described it as bringing the spice and having superpowers. So that sounds awesome to me.
Yeah. So yeah, how does it work? That's what we want to know. Um, and I think it will be helpful to think of the good old anchor tag, the link tag, and how it allows us to communicate to the browser that this little tag has special behavior, and everything that the browser does uh, to provide us that good old linking that we love so much about the web, right? So taking that example there, when you see that little anchor tag with an href pointing to /about, what does it really mean for the browser? Well, it means that when the user clicks on the link, and we'll call that the trigger, the browser should send a GET request to the about page. That's going to be the action. And then we'll make the whole page receive the response. That's going to be the target, the entire page. And then have the response replace the content of the target. That's going to be the swap. So HTMX introduces these four concepts, and you can see that they already apply to the default web, right? And that's something that we understand as web developers. So the I guess the secret sauce is that it allows any element to perform actions, not just anchors and forms, right? So I've rewritten the code there to get a button instead of an anchor tag, and by using this special hx get attribute, I'm able to tell the browser, oh, this button should also be able to make requests to the browser and request this specific about page, right? So, but it doesn't stop there. Actually, you can also specify different things. So you can actually change the target. So instead of targeting just the entire page to render the new content, you can tell it actually go make that request and put the content in a different node in the DOM, right? So in this case, I can use a CSS selector and say, put the results in the result in the div with the ID result, right? And that already starts allowing me to create those islands of interaction where I don't need to reload the entire page. I can just go fetch something and put it into one specific place in the document, right? But we don't need to stop there either. We can also change what trigger the interaction. So normally you would need to click on the button for it to create the request and swap it out in the target. But you can also use any normal event to start the request. So in this case, I can tell it to start the request when I do the mouse enter, right? So by just hovering over the button, I would start the request and it will be swapped into the target div. And then finally, you can also change the swap strategy. So you can do more than just replacing the entire content of the target. You can also tell it to append or prepend the results. So you can have some content already in there. And every time that the user clicks the button, you can keep appending to it or prepending to it, or for some other reason decide that you want to replace the entire element. So those are the four, I would say, basic concepts and the four basic attributes that you can use for spicing up, as we said, an element with HTMX. Uh, so yeah, I think with only that, and it might this example is pretty contrived, I would say, but we'll see some other ones where you can actually implement some interesting UI patterns. But with these four concepts, it gives you a lot of flexibility and allows you to do a lot of things that we would usually reach out for a more complex front-end framework. You can actually do it with only these four ideas here.
Yeah, I was trying to think, are there other actions besides get, or is get sort of the only one that you need this special handling for here?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, you can do any HTTP verb. So you can do hx post, put, patch, delete. So anything that you
Okay.
want, you can do it in here. Yeah. HTMX will allow us to implement those common UI elements by using the four trigger, action, target, and swap concepts. And the first one is the infinite scroll, right? So if we think of the pattern in this trigger action and target ideas, we basically want when the user scrolls into the last element and that last element becomes visible, we want to get the next page of elements, right? And then we want to insert them after the current last element. So if we had, for example, a table where we have a bunch of table rows, and then the very last table row is going to get the special htmx sauce, right? So we're telling it, I'm imagining we're in context page 1, then the last one should actually get context page 2, and the trigger should be when the last row is revealed, and the swap should be after the end of the current element, right? So right after we close the table row, we would want the new content to be appended. And just with that, you would actually, by just scrolling down, you would get the new requests being sent and the results immediately appended after this one. And the cool thing is that your server-side language, whatever you're using, it can know that you have requested to render page 2, so it can render the last element on that page with the htmx to render page 3, and then you just keep going, right? And every time the last element is revealed, you'd get the next page. And when you reach the last one, your server knows that you're at the end of the list, so you just don't render any special htmx code there, and you're done. You stop loading. So I think that's a very, very powerful way of expressing the idea of an infinite scroll.
Yeah, do you need to do something there to tell it that that page is dynamic and each time it gets the next one, it should change that number? Or does it figure that out?
Yeah, that would need to be handled on the server. So I'm thinking in terms of Django because that's what I'm most familiar with. But in Django, you can inspect the URL parameters, so you can know which page you're currently rendering, and usually because you would be getting this from a database or something and doing the pagination on the server first, you're also able to know if you have any more pages or not. So you would probably put this in a conditional block in the server side code, and have the variable just be one up of whatever you got in your get parameter.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I have another one here, which and this is the link which we can share later in the notes. All of these UI patterns are documented in the official documentation. You can see them working as demos, and they have so many others that can really help you get an idea of what kind of things you can implement with htmx. But I have one more here, which is active search. And the idea behind active search is, I think we've all visited a page where you have a form maybe in a sidebar and then a bunch of results in an element right next to it. And when you type in your search query, the elements are filtered live, so to speak, right? And you don't need to submit and reload the whole page. As you're filtering and typing in, you're getting the new results rendered. And usually, again, this is something that you would need a front-end framework to handle. But in this case, if we think again in the htmx way, we basically want when the form input changes, that's going to be the trigger. We want to post the form data or get it, whatever works. And then we also want to insert the new results, the new search results in place of the previous results. So we want to completely replace the target, right? And the way you would express that in htmx is you have your input, and by giving it type search, we'll see how that affects things here. But we're telling it you should post to the search endpoint, right? And then the trigger, we're actually using two triggers. You'll see here that's separated by comma. We're acting on key up and change. So whenever the user changes the input or releases a key, or when the search event is fired, then we want to do the post request. But we're also using a modifier here where we're actually debouncing immediately delaying the sending of the request by 500 milliseconds, so that we actually require the keys to settle for a few milliseconds before sending a bunch of requests on every single keystroke. And then the target is the search results div, right? So with just this code, you have this input that now is going to listen to changes in the keyboard or the search event when you hit enter or when you clear that search input, and it's going to send the data to the server. The server is going to do the filtering and it's going to respond with a new set of results, and you'll get those results immediately inserted here in the search results div. And now you have a very responsive, very performant search interface for your users, and you don't need to manage keyword events or manually go and fetch results and insert them into the DOM. So this is another one that I think is really powerful way of implementing this one.
Yeah, that's really cool. Can you actually show it? Do you want to pull up their demo?
Working? Yeah, absolutely. Let's do that.
Both of those are interesting to me because they're things that I might want to do on like a personal site, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have the JavaScript experience to build them fully myself, but I suppose in some ways it doesn't really solve the full problem for me because I still have to implement search on the back end.
Yeah.
Right. It just handles the it just handles the getting and replacing part.
Yep. Let me just make this a little bit bigger. So they have, this one is a little bit more complex because they actually have an indicator, and these are some advanced features where you can actually have spinners or other elements showing you how to, when you're actually processing a request. But the idea here is that you have your input as well, right? And you also have the table where you are displaying the results, and actually the results are in the body, not the whole table. So the idea is here that I can start typing a name, and I get the result without sending, without having to reload the whole page, right? And I can go look for someone else. Yeah, this person. And the cool thing is that even if I type a bunch of things, it won't fire the request until I have settled for at least half a second, right? And even clearing the input here will also work because we're listening for the search event as well. So yeah, we actually made already 5 requests, and they have this little console here where you can see what you were searching and what the server returned, right? So when I searched this, the server only had to return the already built HTML here, and that's going to be replaced immediately into the table body.
Cool. Does it give you on the other end, so the place where you're making the swap, how hard is it to hook into those actions and say, I need, well, I suppose maybe you don't even need to hook into the actions for this, but like ARIA live updating sort of attributes, do you just add those attributes beforehand, or?
Yeah. So this was definitely push you to, if there's anything accessibility wise that you want to do, you should send the HTML already from your server that way, right? But then because you might have some songs that you want to manually call out as being live, right? Or you might have something where the main content is changing here, but you need to update some little thing in some other place, either just for the user experience or for accessibility. You can also listen for the request events. So you get additional JavaScript events that you can hook into and say, oh, when you process a request and it comes from this endpoint, or when you're targeting this element, actually go and do this extra thing this other place. And then there's also a bunch of other plugins that the community has come up with where you can do a bunch of extra things. You can actually even do WebSockets, server sent events. There's an example here of implementing an actual chat with just htmx, where you can just actually have a list of things and you just want to append new messages in the end. So that actually can be implemented. So yeah, it gives you that flexibility of hooking into the events of sending a request or receiving a response or inserting a new set of content in a node.
That does sound super. But I'm curious, there must be other ways to do some of those same things, other options. What do you see as the benefits of htmx over the other options?
Yeah, So I like to think in terms of comparing it to the classic multi-page application frameworks. So this could be even your WordPress, your Django, your Ruby on Rails, that they focus on getting a single request, right, and responding with a huge chunk of HTML that will re-render the entire page. Those I think are well known, and the browsers work actually great with them. In history, you don't need to manage it, and there's so many advantages, but they are usually perceived as slower for the user because you have to wait for the entire page to load, and you're actually sending a bunch of the same HTML that the user already has in the page when they are visiting your site. In the other end of the spectrum, you have the single page applications, which are the modern frameworks such as React and Vue and Svelte and many others, that they tell you send all the logic to the client and then only send the data that changes, and the client has everything that it needs to rebuild the page or only update the elements that you need to change. And those are actually, the user perceives them as faster and more responsive, but they are more bloated. The initial page load requires more resources, and actually running the pages requires more resources as well, right? And so it can be very taxing to the client to run, and not everything needs that much front-end logic as well. So those are like the disadvantages in the user experience land, where htmx can like bridge the gap, where you can send a very lightweight first content payload to the client with only the actual HTML that they will render right away and the HTMX library in there. And then the next requests are smaller, but they are already made of render HTML. You don't need to hydrate anything. It's already in there, just ready to be replaced. And browsers are actually very fast and very good at replacing elements in the DOM tree, right? So I think those are the advantages in the user experience side of things. Then for developers, I think we talked about this a little bit in the beginning. Um, you don't need this complex tooling and build process to create your pages. You only need your server side process because you already need a server, right? So you have your language of choice, and it can be JavaScript as well. There's really nothing wrong with it, but the point is that you have the option to just use the framework you want that produces HTML, sends that to the browser, and then HTMX can take care of the rest without having a separate build process for that. Um, that's the advantage against the single page application, and against the multi-page applications. You usually in this classic mode, you send your HTML and then you don't hear anything about the client until you get the full request, where you need to respond with a full response of the entire new page. But so HTMX allow you to just respond to these little changes in the UI and just say, oh, this is the new HTML that you need in this little table, in this little sidebar or whatever. So I think that's how it compares, not with any specific, but with the two original paradigms that it's trying to bridge together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds great. I mean, as a user experience designer, I love to say, like, it'll just appear really fast and it doesn't take much effort. So that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. From there, what sort of projects would you say are best suited for it? Is there a sweet spot for this type of middle ground between
Yeah.
fully server rendered and fully client rendered?
Yeah. I think this works great for CRUD apps, which, anything that does create, read, update, and delete operations, anything that has those tables and grids and filters, those kind of things, I think really work great, where you have a set of results that you are either filtering down by some criteria using a form, or where you are maybe inserting new things into it, right? And you need to see the new thing being put into the table, or even doing some bulk updates where you have a bunch of rows and you want to just change a few of them. I think it works great for that. Also for dashboards and applications with, I would say, like small islands of interaction, where you might have a bunch of things on screen, and this thing is a graph about this, or this thing is a little table of your most recent whatever, right? So, and those are like self-contained little islands where they can send requests and be updated in some way, and you don't want to re-render the entire page. That's where it this will really shine, I think, and provide a great the speed up of not re-rendering the whole page, but without the big cost in the client side of things. But to be honest, you also should avoid this for a few use cases. The big one, I think, is of course anything that needs offline support is out of the table, because every interaction is a trip to the server, right? So the moment you lose connectivity, then your UI stops working. So I think for many applications that's fine, because you always want to get the latest data from the server, but definitely for something that's more standalone, you will need to implement those service workers or some offline logic if you want to provide that rich experience for offline users. And then I would say avoid it as well for, games or anything that's doing some drawing in WebGL or something directly with the user's GPU is not going to provide you with any advantage. Or pretty much anything that requires a deep hardware integration, right? You will need to reach out directly to the JavaScript APIs to access the camera, to access other hardware features. So this is not going to help you with that at all. But other than that, I think it's a great choice for a bunch of projects, and it can really save time and make it for a better user experience and a better developer experience as well.
Thanks. It's great to learn about this, what's going on behind the scenes, because it helps me describe to clients with a little more depth of knowledge, like what's going on. Thanks for teaching us about that. So please visit oddbird.net/wingingit to access any of the links and the resources that Ed mentioned in today's show. Send us feedback and topic requests, or tell us how you have found a use for htmx, or even what didn't work. We'd love to hear your experiences. On the next Winging It show, we're going to talk about OOUX and improving communication even more between designers and developers. If you'd like to support us, please subscribe. And if you want to know more about Oddbird, we would invite you to check out our newsletter or our website, oddbird.net, if you want the newsletter /odd news. Thanks, and remember, best practice is a conversation, so let's keep talking.